Fresh meat.
It's the age-old battle between two of cinema's most infamous villains, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers. Who's more ruthless, who has the cooler look, and who kills with the most efficiency and creativity? We're gonna put those and other questions to the test in this edition of Face Off. Jason versus Michael Myers. Now let's start with the aspect that most differentiates the two silent slashers. How did their stories begin? As you well know, Jason was a poor disabled kid who picked the wrong day to take a dip. He drowned while the camp counselors were off necking. However, it turns out he didn't really drown. He evidently spent his formative years living in the woods, feasting on wild animals and tending to his mother's severed head. Once he was good and ready, Jason picked up where his mother left off. On the other hand, Michael Myers was simply born evil, though it took a few years for the evil to truly manifest. One Halloween night, for no discernible reason, Michael found his calling as a killer and took a knife to his older sister. He spent his formative years in a hospital for the criminally insane, just waiting for an opportunity to get out and raise more hell in his sleepy hometown of Haddonfield. While Jason's origins may be slightly more tragic, Michael Myers gets a leg up here because there's no explanation for his evil. He was always destined to be bad to the bone. Here's our first tough one. Both of these killers' masks are truly iconic. Of course, Jason didn't start off with a mask, he went with a potato sack. Anything to cover up that ugly mug will do. But then, thanks to a lovably obnoxious prankster named Shelly, he eventually found what would become his preferred face shield, a hockey mask. Meanwhile, Michael Myers got his mask, a chillingly blank thing from a department store. Michael's mask changes a bit throughout the series, especially in the hair department, but its basic look is always the same. It's been stated plenty of times that the aspect that makes the mask so frightening is how expressionless it is, allowing you to project whatever you want on it. Add in some heavy breathing, and it's a true classic. Plus, it gets a few bonus points for being a William Shatner mask.
I think it's going to be a long, long time.
And both Jason and Michael have undergone some changes over the years, though the masks usually stay just about the same. The rest of the ensemble gets a makeover every once in a while. Michael's signature look, of course, revolves around his coveralls, usually obtained from an unfortunate mechanic. It's a simple outfit, but seems to work well for Michael, who has just enough flexibility to stab and slash whoever gets in his way. And of course, he went into something of a hobo chic phase, Rob Zombie's H2 for a bit, but we're willing to overlook that. Jason, however, has definitely gone through some different looks throughout the decades. He got over the hillbilly look part 2 fairly quickly and ultimately went with the simple black shirt and slacks look we know so well. His coolest look is probably in The New Blood. With the torn up clothing, the chain around the neck, the cracked mask, this is the ultimate zombie Jason presentation, and as the kids say, we're here for it. Also, thanks to being a water zombie, Jason's usually soaking wet in the later installments, which can't be too comfortable, but he doesn't really let it get in the way of his business. Jason underwent some very different looks later on in the series. He was literally inhabiting other people's bodies in Jason Goes to Hell, and he found himself massively upgraded in outer space in Jason X. While he may be a single-minded killing machine, you can't argue that Jason's evolved his style over the years. Advantage Jason. To answer your question, yes, we are including every film these guys have been in, so that means sequels, reboots, and remakes. This one is no contest. Jason Voorhees has racked up an astounding 157 bodies in 40 years. That's a lot of nubile young flesh. That's also not including the sabbatical he took after his death in Part 4, although you must admit paramedic Roy Burns certainly acquitted himself well after he went bonkers and decided to do some killing of his own in A New Beginning. Meanwhile, while no slouch himself, Michael Myers trails behind a little with only 121 murders, but as we all know, Myers is still on the prowl and in the midst of a new trilogy of films, so he's got some time to catch up to his undead colleague in chaos. Can he rack up over 30 kills? We believe in you, Mike. Advantage Jason. And now for the fun part. One thing that makes these two soulless killers so fun to watch is their creativity when it comes to offing their victims. Well, he's almost always associated with a machete.
Guys, it's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
Jason has never been one to restrict himself to just one implement of destruction. Jason uses whatever is available, and that includes fence posts Darren in Part 6, saws Dr. Cruz in Part 7, axes Melissa in Part 7, spear guns Vera in Part 3, drums of toxic waste Charles in Part 8, party horns Catherine in Part 7, sleeping bags Judith in Part 7, Amanda in the remake, beds Freddy vs. Jason, and even liquid nitrogen Jason X. All that said, one could argue Jason is at his best when he's using his bare hands. Rick's skull crushed in Part 3, Julius's head knocked off in Part 8, Elizabeth's head twisted around in Part 6 to crush skulls and twist heads. Bottom line, if it can maim you, Jason will gladly use it.
Smoke weed every day.
Michael's tastes in torture are a little more laid back, although he's definitely up for using whatever is nearby in a pinch. The weapon he's most associated with is a large kitchen knife, just as Bob from 1978 Halloween, but he's good with his hands too. Strangling, 1978 Halloween, drowning, Halloween 2, straight up throat-ripping Redneck Driver in Part 4 when he needs to. During his more imaginative moods, Michael has gone with his scalpel in Halloween 2, a transformer, Bucky in Part 4, and an ice skate, JGL and H2O. Let's face it, these two are not afraid to get their hands dirty, using basically any and everything in the vicinity to screw up your day. Advantage draw. To be fair, while both Jason and Michael have maimed and murdered dozens upon dozens of folks, they're not immune to a good beating themselves. Well, okay, they are technically immune. Since they keep coming back again and again, but these guys get worked over pretty good every once in a while. Jason had to learn how to man up at an early age, with that near drowning experience and all. Once he grew up and was good and strong, if not exactly attractive, Jason decided to follow in dear old mommy's footsteps and absolutely destroy whomever came into his orbit. But Jason has one weakness. Teenage girls.
You sexy thing, you.
Yes, the only people who thwart Jason are resilient young women. And one boy, Tommy in Part 4, who won't go as quietly as their counterparts. Jason's been axed in the head, Part 3, had a machete buried in his face, Part 4, drowned again in Crystal Lake in Part 6, drowned yet again in Part 7, bombarded with toxic waste in Part 8, blown the hell up. Jason goes to hell, and he rarely misses a step after that, as the old saying goes. You can't kill what's already dead. But Michael has gone through his share of trials and tribulations as well. Dude has been stabbed with a knitting needle, shot, set ablaze, beaten with a pipe by Paul Rudd in Halloween 6, and perhaps most controversially decapitated H2O, and we'll ignore being karate kicked by Busta Rhymes. Now, depending on which timeline we're talking about, some of Michael's durability can be attributed to the Cult of Thorn, which gives him supernatural abilities, but no matter what the explanation, Michael is one man who doesn't go down easily. That said, he can't claim to have ever been exploded by a SWAT team and sent to hell. Talk about taking a licking and keeping on ticking after all those hardships. You'd think it was impossible to come back and resume your normal existence of stalking and slashing innocent bystanders. Not so. Both of these guys have way too much work to do to let a little death stand in their way. Let's be honest, Jason has technically died more times than Michael, and one could argue that Michael never really dies at the end of any of the Halloween films. He's just a resilient mofo. Jason, however, is a zombie from hell, and he's always known how to make an entrance, from slicing up dorky orderlies at the hospital in Part 4 to being accidentally resurrected by his biggest enemy in Part 6 to waking up underwater. Thanks to the new telekinetic girl in the neighborhood in Part 7, Jason doesn't waste any time doing what he does best after coming back from the dead. My guy even gets called up out of hell itself by Freddy Krueger just to go back to murdering folks he doesn't even know. Michael Myers may take more hits than anyone can bear, but Jason is simply unkillable. Every villain needs a hero who tries to stop him, and both Jason and Michael have had their share of pesky foils. Michael has not one but two imposing enemies, Dr. Sam Lewis and Laurie Strode. Dr. Loomis has been dedicated to keeping Michael off the streets for a long time, and if he can't lock him up, he'll gladly kill him.
Got him 6 times! What? I shot him 6 times!
And that's Loomis shooting him in the original, blowing up the hospital in 2. In addition to the good doctor, Michael made a serious foe out of Laurie Strode, who was a bit of a shrinking violet to begin with, but eventually emerged an ass-kicking heroine for the ages, the ultimate final girl. These are two people who truly despise the monster and will do anything to stop him. Meanwhile, it seems as though Jason has had a new adversary every time he steps out of the Earth shack. A handful of crafty gals have stood up to Jason over the years, parts 2, 3, 7, 8, Final Friday, Freddy vs. Jason, but his most noteworthy nemesis is Tommy Jarvis, a spunky kid with an affinity for horror flicks who absolutely obliterates Jason at the end of the final chapter. Years after his flawless victory, Tommy has grown up to be a not-so-bright escaped mental patient who mistakenly resurrects Jason. Seriously, dude, what the hell kind of plan was that? Only to get the better of him once more, sending Jason to a watery and temporary grave. Tommy is a noteworthy hero, but simply put, he's no Laurie Strode. Now we know these two are pitiless monsters who will take out any and all fools. They both started off as human beings, so there's gotta be a smidgen of humanity in there somewhere, right? Not really. I mean, Jason kills a pregnant chick in part 3, and Michael constantly attempting to murder his own relatives, so neither looms large on the sympathy scale. But there are a tiny handful of moments where these guys prove there might be a little life left in there. After all, consider that Jason still loves his murderous mama after all these years, even saving her head as a gruesome keepsake. Aww. And if you have to hand this to him, when he finally gets the chance to kill actual campers in part 6, he declines to hack up any children. Nice. Obviously, you have to at least be in your early teens to get into Jason's crosshairs. As for Michael, well, here and there he shows his human side, such as it is. Even though he's on a mission to kill her, his niece Jamie Lloyd is able to connect with Michael a couple of times, end of part 4, which sees him let down his guard, if only temporarily. And if we're looking at the Rob Zombie films, Michael has all sorts of hang-ups, most of them involving his mom. He's also not above the odd surreal fantasy, again involving his mom, so there's no doubt that there's some semblance of humanity in there. Also, for sure, both these dudes have serious mommy issues. That makes them a bit more relatable. No? And the verdict is... draw. It's not how we drew it up, folks, but that's where we landed. Perhaps it's just too difficult of a challenge. These two icons are so killer in their own ways, we simply cannot choose one over the other. But don't leave it to just us to be judge and jury. Weigh in with your opinion in the comments section. Do you have a preference when it comes to Jason versus Michael Myers? Or is it a draw for you too? Let us know.